Death rarely arrives without warning. Like autumn leaves that slowly change color before falling, our bodies often give us quiet signals when life begins its final chapter. Yet, in our fast-paced world, these whispers are easily missed. Subtle changes that seem insignificant until we look back and realize they were trying to tell us something important all along. Today, I want to share a story about my grandmother, Eleanor, a woman who lived with such vibrancy that when her time came, we almost didn't see it happening until it was too late. The signs were there, quiet but persistent, waiting for us to notice. Eleanor had always been the heart of our family gatherings, her hands constantly in motion, whether baking her famous apple pie or tending to her garden of hydrangeas. Her laughter could fill a room. But in what would be her final year, something began to shift, so gradually that we initially dismissed it as simply getting older. What my family and I didn't understand then, what I wish someone had told us, was that her body was giving us signs. Signs that, had we recognized them, would have allowed us to cherish those final months differently, to prepare not just practically but emotionally for what was coming. This knowledge isn't meant to inspire fear, but understanding, because recognizing these signs can transform how we experience this sacred transition. It can help us provide better care, create meaningful final memories, and ensure our loved ones' last chapter is filled with dignity, comfort, and peace. By the end of our time together, you'll understand 5 key signs that often appear in an elderly person's final year. Signs that are frequently overlooked until we look back with the clarity of hindsight. This isn't about predicting exact timing, but about learning the language our bodies speak when approaching life's conclusion. This journey we'll take together isn't just about awareness. It's about making these precious final moments as beautiful and meaningful as possible. Because when we understand what's happening, we can be truly present for those we love when it matters most. It's like blowing the cobwebs out of an in-depth headache. The double attendant onslaught aggression. Are we? Is this social commentary? Eleanor had always been particular about her appearance. Even into her 80s, she maintained a certain elegance, hair always neatly styled, clothes pressed and coordinated. So when her favorite blue dress began hanging loosely on her frame, we barely noticed at first. "You're getting too skinny, Mom," my father would joke, sliding an extra serving onto her plate at Sunday dinners. But there was nothing humorous about what was happening. What we were witnessing, this gradual, persistent shedding of weight, was her body beginning its quiet preparation. Significant weight loss in the elderly isn't just about appearance. It's one of the earliest and most telling signs that fundamental changes are occurring beneath the surface. The body begins to process nutrients differently. Metabolism shifts. The very systems that have sustained life for decades begin to slow their pace. For Eleanor, it started subtly, clothes fitting differently, her wedding ring sliding too easily on her finger. But what made this change so easy to miss was that it happened without effort or intention. She wasn't dieting or exercising more. Her body was simply beginning to require less. The science behind this is profound. As the body approaches its final stage, muscle mass diminishes, not just from reduced activity, but because the body's ability to synthesize protein weakens. This isn't the natural muscle loss that comes with aging, it's an acceleration of that process. The body, in its ancient wisdom, begins conserving energy for essential functions, directing fewer resources to maintaining muscle that it soon won't need. Equally telling was Eleanor's changing relationship with food. The woman who once took such pleasure in her garden vegetables and homemade bread began leaving more and more on her plate. "I'm just not hungry," she would say, pushing away meals after just a few bites. Her sense of taste had dulled, making food less appealing. Meals became obligation rather than pleasure. This wasn't stubbornness or depression, though both can contribute to reduced eating. It was her body sending signals that its energy requirements were changing. The complex hormone system that triggers hunger was quieting, whispering rather than announcing its needs. What we didn't understand then was that underneath this weight loss, other processes were at work. Conditions like heart failure, kidney disease, or undiagnosed cancer can accelerate this decline, often without other obvious symptoms. Eleanor's body was preparing for transition in ways that medicine could observe, but not necessarily reverse. We tried everything, making her favorite foods, bringing her special treats, even protein supplements that sat unopened in her cabinet. But our well-intentioned efforts missed the deeper message. When significant weight loss persists despite intervention, it's not simply about eating more, it's about recognizing the body's natural transition. Looking back now, I wish we had shifted our focus sooner from trying to reverse the inevitable to creating moments of comfort around food. Small, nutrient-dense offerings, hydration, and most importantly, the warmth of company, rather than the pressure to clean her plate. If you notice this pattern in someone you love, weight falling away despite normal eating, clothes that suddenly hang loose, a wedding ring that slips off too easily, pause and listen to what their body is trying to tell you, not with fear, but with deep presence and compassion for the journey ahead. Sign 2, the deepening rest, profound fatigue and weakness. Remember those Sunday mornings when Eleanor would be up before dawn, starting the family dinner, ironing tablecloths, arranging flowers? Energy seemed to radiate from her very presence. That's why we couldn't understand why, in what would be her final year, she began spending afternoons in her armchair, gazing out at her garden rather than tending it. "I'm just resting my eyes," she would say when we found her dozing at unusual hours. We attributed it to a poor night's sleep, or perhaps the new medication she was taking. What we were witnessing was something far more significant than ordinary tiredness. It was a profound, bone-deep weariness that rest couldn't touch. A fatigue so complete that even the simplest tasks, buttoning a cardigan, walking to the mailbox, following a conversation, became exhausting marathons. But this isn't the fatigue of a busy day or poor sleep. It's the body's energy reserves beginning to wane, the great battery of life slowly discharging. The heart, no longer pumping with its former efficiency, delivers less oxygen to muscles and brain. Circulation weakens, metabolism slows dramatically. The body in its wisdom begins triaging its energy use, prioritizing vital functions over activity. For Eleanor, this showed up first in her gardens. The woman who once spent hours kneeling among her flowers now watched them from the window. Tasks she had done without thinking, preparing meals, getting dressed, walking to church, suddenly required calculation, rest breaks, careful planning. "Give me a minute" became her familiar refrain, followed by "I'll do it later," and eventually, "I don't think I can today." Each surrender to fatigue was not laziness, but her body demanding conservation of precious energy reserves. What made this especially difficult was watching her frustration. Eleanor had valued her independence fiercely. Now she found herself needing help with basic tasks, her body no longer responding to her determined spirit. The social butterfly who once organized community events now found conversations draining, visitors exhausting. She began declining invitations, shortening phone calls, withdrawing not from lack of interest but from physical necessity. As family, we made a common mistake. We encouraged her to push through it, to stay active, thinking exercise would help restore her energy. We didn't understand that this wasn't ordinary fatigue to be conquered, but a fundamental change in her body's capacity. No amount of determination could override what her body was telling her. What Eleanor needed wasn't more activity, but permission to rest, to conserve her energy for what mattered most to her. When we finally understood this, our approach changed. Instead of encouraging her to do more, we focused on making the things she could still do more meaningful. Brief visits rather than long gatherings, sitting together in comfortable silence, finding value in presence rather than activity. If someone you love begins showing this kind of profound fatigue, needing more sleep, becoming winded with minimal exertion, withdrawing from activities they once enjoyed, listen to what their body is saying. It's not about pushing them to do more, but about honoring their changing needs and making each interaction quality over quantity. The body speaks wisdom when we learn to listen. Eleanor's increasing need for rest wasn't giving up. It was her body preparing for its final, greatest transition. Sign 3. The inward journey, cognitive changes and withdrawal. Eleanor had always been sharp as a tack, completing the daily crossword in pen, managing her finances to the penny, remembering not just birthdays but the gifts she'd given each person the previous year. Her mind was a vast library of family stories, recipes made without measuring cups, and telephone numbers she'd never needed to write down. That's why we found it so troubling when she called my sister by my name 3 times during a Sunday visit. Just a slip of the tongue, we told ourselves. When she forgot to turn off the stove, we blamed it on distraction. When she couldn't follow the plot of her favorite television program, we thought perhaps it was just too complicated. But these weren't isolated incidents. They were the beginning of a subtle cognitive shift that often accompanies life's final chapter. Not necessarily dementia or Alzheimer's, though those conditions can certainly accelerate in the final year, but a different kind of cognitive change. A gradual unhooking from the details of daily life, a turning inward. For Eleanor, it manifested as a new kind of confusion. Places she had visited hundreds of times suddenly seemed unfamiliar. Conversations became harder to follow, especially with multiple people talking. She would lose her train of thought mid-sentence, not with frustration, but with a peaceful acceptance, as if the thought itself had become less important. More noticeable was her gradual emotional withdrawal. The woman who had always been the first to call after any family news, good or bad, became quieter. She listened more than she spoke. Her responses, once animated and engaged, became shorter, more distant. Not cold, there was still warmth in her smile, but as if she were already beginning to disengage from the intricate connections that had defined her life. This withdrawal isn't rejection. It's the mind's natural preparation for transition. The brain, like the body, begins conserving energy, focusing inward rather than outward. Social connections, which once energized and sustained, now require more energy than they provide. We noticed Eleanor spending more time looking through old photographs, less interested in current events or future plans. She seemed to be reviewing her life, focusing on what had been rather than what would be. Sometimes she spoke of long-gone relatives as if they had just visited, or shared stories from her childhood with unusual clarity, while forgetting what she'd had for breakfast. What many families misinterpret as confusion is often something more profound, a shifting relationship with time itself, as if the mind, preparing for its journey, begins to exist less rigidly in the present moment, moving fluidly between past and present, between what is and what was. For families, this transition is perhaps the most painful to witness. It feels like losing someone who is still physically present, a grief without closure. When Eleanor looked at me with momentary confusion before recognition dawned, I felt a stab of loss that took my breath away. Yet in those moments of disconnect, there was also something sacred happening. Her spirit preparing for its greatest journey. What helped most was meeting her where she was, rather than trying to pull her back to where she had been. When she spoke of her childhood home as if she'd just come from there, we asked questions about it rather than correcting her. When she seemed overwhelmed by conversation, we sat in companionable silence. When names escaped her, we supplied them without making it a test. If someone you love begins showing these signs, confusion about time or place, emotional withdrawal, a shifting focus from future to past, recognize it not as something to fight against, but as part of a natural transition. It's not about testing their memory or correcting their perception, but about creating moments of connection that meet them in their new reality. In these quiet spaces between full presence and absence, there is still profound opportunity for love and connection. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer is simply our quiet presence as they begin their inward journey. Sign 4. The body's defenses lowered their frequency. infections and slow healing. Eleanor had always been remarkably healthy. Never even had a cavity, she would boast, attributing her robust immune system to a childhood spent outdoors and a lifetime of homegrown vegetables. Colds that felled the rest of the family would barely touch her. Cuts and bruises healed quickly, almost miraculously for someone her age. That's why we grew concerned when a simple paper cut on her finger lingered for weeks, the skin remaining red and tender despite careful attention. When a mild cough from a family gathering transformed into bronchitis that kept returning despite multiple rounds of antibiotics. When the urinary tract infections began occurring with alarming frequency, each one leaving her more depleted than the last. What we were witnessing was her body's defenses beginning to lower, the immune system that had protected her so valiantly for decades now struggling to mount the same response. This isn't simply the immune decline of normal aging, but an acceleration of that process as the body approaches its final transition. The immune system is remarkably complex, a symphony of white blood cells, antibodies, and specialized molecules that must work in perfect harmony. As the body begins its final phase, this symphony loses some of its key players. The bone marrow produces fewer immune cells. Existing cells become less efficient at identifying and fighting pathogens. The body's ability to recognize and respond to threats diminishes. For Eleanor, this meant that ordinary exposures, a grandchild's sniffles, a tiny cut while gardening, bacteria that her body would once have dispatched without effort, now triggered infections that her system couldn't easily overcome. What should have been minor became major. What should have healed quickly lingered. Even more tellingly, her symptoms often didn't present in expected ways. Rather than fever or obvious pain, her infections announced themselves through increased confusion, loss of appetite, or unusual fatigue. By the time we recognized something was wrong, the infection had often gained significant ground. As families, our instinct is to fight these infections aggressively. Stronger antibiotics, enhanced wound care, protective isolation. We see each infection as a separate battle rather than part of a larger process. But when infections become recurrent and healing slows dramatically, it's a signal that the body's fundamental capacity to repair itself is changing. For Eleanor, this pattern of infection and slow recovery became a repeating cycle, each episode leaving her a little weaker, a little more vulnerable to the next. The woman who had always bounced back from illness now struggled to regain her strength, each recovery less complete than the last. What helped most was shifting our focus from cure to comfort. Yes, we treated infections when appropriate, but we also recognized that her body was telling us something important about its changing capabilities. We became more proactive, ensuring excellent hydration, nutrition, skin care, and rest to prevent what could be prevented. And when infections did occur, we focused equally on comfort and treatment. If someone you love begins experiencing this pattern, frequent infections, slow wound healing, or unusual responses to ordinary illnesses, recognize it as their body speaking an important truth. It's not just about more aggressive medical intervention, but about understanding that their body's relationship with healing is fundamentally changing. This understanding allows for more compassionate, realistic care decisions that honor both the desire for healing and the reality of the body's changing capacity. Sometimes the most loving care isn't fighting for cure at all costs, but ensuring comfort and dignity along the journey. A sign, the rhythm changes, alterations in breathing and circulation. I remember sitting beside Eleanor's bed one afternoon, watching her chest rise and fall as she napped. Something about the pattern caught my attention. It wasn't the steady rhythm I was accustomed to. She would take several quick, shallow breaths, then pause for what seemed an eternity before breathing again. My heart would clench during those pauses, relief flooding through me when her chest finally moved again. What I was witnessing was a profound change in one of life's most fundamental rhythms, the breath that has been our constant companion since birth. Changes in breathing patterns are among the most significant signs that the body is approaching its final transition. Changes that often begin subtly, months before the end. For Eleanor, it started with being more easily winded, needing to rest after walking from the bedroom to the kitchen, something that had never troubled her before. She began propping herself up with more pillows at night, finding it uncomfortable to lie flat. Conversations would be interrupted as she paused to catch her breath mid-sentence. Over time, these changes became more pronounced. Her breathing would alternate between periods of rapid, shallow breaths and long pauses, a pattern known as Cheyne-Stokes respiration. It was as if her body was rehearsing, preparing for the moment when breath would no longer be needed. Alongside these changes in breathing came shifts in circulation. Eleanor's hands and feet, once warm to the touch, became persistently cool, sometimes taking on a bluish tint around the nails. The vital force of circulation was pulling inward, prioritizing core organs over extremities. Her body, in its ancient wisdom, was directing blood flow where it was most essential. What makes these changes so significant is that breath and circulation are life's most basic rhythms, the foundation upon which all other physical processes depend. When these begin to alter, it's a profound signal that the body is preparing for its final transition. For families, these changes can be frightening to witness. The pauses in breathing trigger primal fear. The cold hands and bluish tint serve as visible reminders of what is happening. Our instinct is to somehow normalize these rhythms, to encourage deeper breathing, to warm cold hands with our own, to fight against what these changes represent. But there comes a point when understanding brings more comfort than resistance. These altered rhythms aren't something to be corrected, but acknowledged as part of the body's natural wisdom as it prepares for transition. For Eleanor, what helped most was our presence and understanding. Elevating her head when breathing was difficult, light blankets for warmth without weight, gentle touch that conveyed love without expectation, and most importantly, our calm presence beside her, matching our rhythm to hers, rather than expecting her to maintain what had once been normal. If you notice these changes in someone you love, altered breathing patterns, cold extremities, or changes in skin color, recognize them as important messages from the body, not cause for panic, but for deeper presence and understanding of the journey they're on. In those changing rhythms, there is an ancient wisdom at work, the body gently loosening its connections to physical life, preparing for whatever lies beyond our final breath. As I reflect on Eleanor's final year, I'm struck by how these 5 signs, weight loss, fatigue, cognitive changes, frequent infections, and altered breathing, weren't separate events, but connected threads in the same tapestry, each one speaking the same truth in a different language, the body preparing for its final transition. What I wish we had understood sooner was that recognizing these signs isn't about fighting against them. It's about listening to what they're telling us and responding with presence, comfort, and love rather than resistance. When we finally understood what was happening, our focus shifted. Instead of pushing Eleanor to eat more, stay more active, or engage as she once had, we began to honor her journey. We created quiet moments of connection. We shared memories. We sat in peaceful silence holding her cool hands. We learned that even when words failed and strength ebbed, love remained a bridge between us. If you're noticing these signs in someone you love, know that this awareness isn't meant to bring fear but understanding. It's an invitation to make their remaining time as meaningful and comfortable as possible, to focus not on what's being lost, but on what can still be shared, to create moments of beauty, dignity, and peace that honor their journey. In the end, what Eleanor needed most wasn't more medical intervention or encouragement to fight against her body's natural process. What she needed, what we all need in our final chapter, was to be seen, to be comfortable, and to know that we are deeply loved. Let this knowledge guide you to create a space of peace and presence as you walk alongside someone in their final chapter. Because in the end, how we leave this world matters as much as how we lived in it. Thank you for joining me on this journey of understanding. If this video has helped you, please share it with others who might need this wisdom. Leave a comment about your own experiences or insights. And remember, recognizing these signs isn't about fearing the end, but about bringing more love, understanding, and peace to life's final transition.